This is yet another stupid, costly experiment by a Prime Minister and a government who have no clue what they're doing. And this is just, I know this sounds a weird thing to say, but I just don't think ID cards are very English or very British.
Oh, really?
Yes, because they literally, what it says is essentially that you don't trust your own people. It changes the relationship you have with the state. It means that you are kind of the property of the state. In England, in Britain, you're born free. When you have to have an ID card, you become a number, just like you would have a car number. So I just don't think it's a very British thing to have. But more what bothers me every bit as much as that is the fact that this will cost a lot of money and it will serve absolutely no purpose. And this guy keeps on shoving through policies and laws, and then when the public object, he then backtracks on them. Now, when you've made this many mistakes, it's not the fact you've backtracked on them is not going to gain you another single vote, not anywhere, because you've messed up people's lives, and they're not going to forgive you for that.
Yeah,
and people won't forgive him for this. I just think it's, I just think ID cards. I know people always say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't matter.
Picture this. You wake up in a country where your right to exist, work and grab a pint is verified not by the fact that you're a living, breathing human being with a birth certificate, but by a flickering QR code on a government-issued app that probably crashes more often than a learner driver in a blizzard. Welcome to the dystopian dreamscape of Sir Keir Starmer's Britain, or at least what it was supposed to be until the latest spectacular, screeching U-turn left the Prime Minister smelling of burnt rubber and desperation. It turns out that trying to turn the British public into a collection of serial numbers is about as popular as a tax hike on Sunday roasts. Carole Malone didn't just critique this plan, she took a flamethrower to it on live television, leaving the government's digital dreams looking like a pile of expensive, bureaucratic ash. Before we dive into the absolute carnage of Malone's takedown and why the government is currently doing a backflip that would make an Olympic gymnast weep with envy, I have a quick favour to ask. If you are loving the updates and the sharp analysis here at the British Report, please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. Over 92% of our regular viewers haven't actually subscribed yet. It is completely free. It takes less than a second of your time, and it truly means the world to us as we continue to hold the powers that be to account. Thank you so much if you did. Now back to the absolute chaos in Westminster. The air in the television studios was thick with the scent of a brewing storm when Carole Malone took to the airwaves. We have seen a lot of political gymnastics since Labour took the keys to number 10. But the digital ID saga is in a league of its own. Malone, never one to mince her words, launched a verbal offensive against Sir Keir Starmer that resonated from Land's End to John O'Groats. Her argument wasn't just about the technology, it was about the very soul of what it means to be British. She described the mandatory digital ID scheme as a stupid, costly experiment conducted by a government that appears to have lost its compass in a thick fog of authoritarian ambition. The core of her rage, the idea that we are being transformed from citizens into subjects, or worse, into property of the state. It is a powerful analogy, isn't it? The idea that once you are forced to carry a digital leash, the relationship between the individual and the state is fundamentally broken. Malone argued that Brits are born free, but the moment you are reduced to a digital entry in a Whitehall database, you become nothing more than a number. It is the kind of sharp common sense rhetoric that makes the smooth-talking lawyers in the cabinet look positively out of touch. She pointed out that this wasn't just a breach of liberty, but a monumental waste of taxpayer money that would serve absolutely no purpose. When the Treasury is constantly crying poverty, finding billions for a surveillance tool nobody asked for is a bit of a hard sell, wouldn't you say?
But the bottom line is, with an ID card, everything about you is on that card. And I don't trust this government and this Prime Minister to have respect for that information and to use it properly. I think it will be abused. We're heading towards an authoritarian state right now. And I think this would have been another step down that line.
The thing is, with ID cards for me, I just think, let's say I was a shady business owner, I own a restaurant. I would just, and if I wanted to hire illegal immigrants, I'd hire them, just pay them cash in hand.
Of course you would.
Do you know what I mean? The ID card's going to make no difference to that.
No.
And it's certainly not going to stop the boats.
No.
Even if people had ID cards and we gave them the ID cards before they come to the country, they'll just get on the dinghy when they get on the beach.
Of course.
No ID.
So we will be spending billions, no doubt, but with introducing these. And what purpose are they going to serve, apart from making us the property of the state, apart from us having to hand over to the state everything about ourselves? And I just think people, I don't want to carry one. And what would happen to me and this is going to be interesting, what's going to happen to me if I haven't got one?
Yeah.
If they're not compulsory. You know, if I've got a credit card, it's every bit as useful to a copper who stops me for something, or if I have a pass card to get into this building.
Yeah.
It's every bit as useful as an ID card is going to be. So why are we going to waste billions of pounds that we don't have to spare?
But wait, it gets even more deliciously awkward. While Malone was laying waste to the policy on the airwaves, the government was already beginning its retreat. If you've been following the news, you'll know that Sir Keir Starmer is becoming something of a world record holder for the policy pivot. Just months ago, on the eve of the Labour Party conference, he was as firm as a headmaster with a cane. He told us, and I quote, "Let me spell it out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. Fast forward to the present day, and that mandatory requirement is looking about as solid as a chocolate teapot in a microwave." Enter Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who stepped up on Wednesday to try and polish this particular political turd. She insisted that it would still be compulsory to prove your right to work, as it always has been, mind you, but she signalled that this would no longer be limited to the Prime Minister's shiny new digital ID scheme. Essentially, they are watering it down faster than a cheap lager at a music festival. Malone was quick to point out that this U-turn won't save Starmer at the ballot box. People don't like being messed around, and they certainly don't like being threatened with the loss of their livelihoods over a scheme the government couldn't even commit to for 6 months. And speaking of commitment issues, the opposition is having an absolute field day. At Prime Minister's questions, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch was practically beaming as she welcomed the latest U-turn, describing the mandatory digital ID as a rubbish policy. It is hard to argue with that assessment when the Prime Minister himself couldn't even bring himself to defend his original mandatory stance when questioned. He spent his time at the dispatch box rambling about checks and legality while carefully avoiding the phrase digital ID only. It was a masterclass in political evasion, but to the viewers at home, it looked like a man who had just realised he'd walked into a glass door in front of the entire nation. The irony here is thicker than a bowl of porridge. This government loves to talk about respecting the people, yet as Malone rightly noted, a mandatory ID scheme says the exact opposite. It says, we don't trust you. It suggests that every British worker is a suspect until proven otherwise by a government-approved algorithm. Malone's fear, and it's one shared by many, is that we are heading down an authoritarian road where every aspect of our lives is under the cosh. If they can force you to have a digital ID to work, what's next? A digital ID to buy a loaf of bread? A digital ID to access the internet? Once you build the infrastructure for total control, history suggests the state is rarely shy about using it. However, the plot thickens like a gravy left on the hob too long. This isn't just one isolated incident of indecision. No, the digital ID debacle is merely the latest entry in a growing library of Labour U-turns. We are currently counting at least 13 major reversals since they took office. Remember the business rates hike for pubs? Scrapped after the hospitality industry pointed out it would be the final nail in the coffin for the local boozer. Remember the inheritance tax raid on farmers, watered down after thousands of tractors descended on Westminster. It seems the only thing this government is consistent at is being inconsistent.
This doesn't happen very often, so brace yourselves, because I might, just might, have a little bit of good news for you. Something that's just literally broken not that long ago. You know, the very, very unpopular proposals to have mandatory digital ID. This was a bit of a passion project, shall we say, for Keir Starmer. Well, now, if rumours are to be believed, conversations are taking place at a senior level to actually remove the mandatory aspect of this proposal. So instead of people being forced to have digital ID to prove their right to work in this country, it would perhaps now be moving to be an optional aspect.
Government officials are now desperately trying to spin this as planned consultation. They claim they were always going to listen to the public. Right, if you believe that, I have a bridge in London to sell you, cash only, no digital ID required. The reality is that they hit a wall of public resentment and panicked. The possibility is now wide open that the digital ID programme will be entirely voluntary. But as Carole Malone asked, if it's voluntary, what is the point of it? Why spend millions on a system that people can simply choose to ignore? It's the kind of bureaucratic logic that makes your head spin. The problem for Sir Keir is that every time he reverses course, he chips away at his own authority. He came into power promising stability and a plan. But a plan that changes every time a journalist or an opposition leader raises their voice isn't a plan, it's a suggestion. Malone's take was particularly biting on this front. She doesn't trust this government to respect the information they collect. And can you blame her? We've seen enough data breaches and government IT failures over the last decade to fill a library. Handing over your entire digital identity to a government that can't even decide if the ID is mandatory or not feels like handing your house keys to a burglar because he promised to look after the place. As we look at the wreckage of this policy, it's worth asking why they were so keen on it in the first place. The stated goal was to crack down on illegal working, a noble aim certainly, but we already have passports, birth certificates and national insurance numbers. We have a myriad of ways to prove who we are. The push for a centralised digital ID feels less like a solution to illegal working and more like a solution in search of a problem, or perhaps a tool for a government that wants a bit more data on its citizens than is strictly necessary for a free society. Carole Malone's intervention was more than just a media moment. It was a rallying cry for those who feel the state is overstepping its bounds. She tapped into a very British sense of independence. We aren't a papers please kind of society. We are a mind-your-own-business kind of society. The idea that we need a digital hall pass from Sir Keir Starmer just to do an honest day's work is anathema to the British character. And as Malone so elegantly put it, this authoritarian road is one that the public simply refuses to walk down. So where does this leave the Prime Minister? He is stuck in a classic political pincer movement. On one side, he has the civil service and the technocrats whispering in his ear about efficiency and modernisation. On the other, he has the likes of Carole Malone, Kemi Badenoch, and a very angry public reminding him that he serves us, not the other way round. Every time he attempts to implement one of these top-down controls, he finds himself forced into a humiliating retreat. It's becoming the defining theme of his premiership: grand announcements followed by quiet, embarrassed withdrawals. The digital ID saga isn't over, of course. The government will launch its public consultation, which is usually civil service speak for "we're going to wait for the shouting to die down and then try again under a different name." But the damage is done. The mandatory mask has slipped, and we've seen the face of a government that wants more control than it is capable of handling. Malone's destruction of Starmer on this issue wasn't just about the IDs. It was a critique of a leadership style that values bureaucracy over liberty and data over people. In the end, perhaps the most telling part of this whole affair is the silence from the government's backbenches. When your own MPs are too quiet to defend a flagship policy, you know you're in trouble. They can see the writing on the wall. They know that the British public won't be bullied into becoming property of the state. Carole Malone said it, the farmers said it, the pub owners said it, and now, it seems, even the government is starting to hear it, even if they have to pretend it was their idea to change their minds all along. It's a funny old world, isn't it? One day you're spelling it out that digital IDs are the future of the British workforce, and the next you're hiding behind Rachel Reeves while she tries to explain that mandatory actually means optional-ish. It would be a comedy if it weren't our tax money and our civil liberties on the line. But as long as there are voices like Malone's to call out the nonsense, there is hope that we might just remain born free after all. The British Report will be right here watching every U-turn, every pivot and every awkward PMQs exchange to make sure you know exactly what's going on behind the black door of number 10. Thank you for watching.